General Synod of the UCC is the gathered national congregation of our church. It's a meeting of about 900 voting delegates who make a variety of decisions about our church. There are a lot of visitors too, I think about 2,000. And a big exhibition hall with all sorts of churchy stuff to look at and to buy. On one level, I think of it as a big-time church camp for youth and adults, but with hotel rooms rather than bunk beds and sketchy bathroom facilities. Although one synod a couple of years ago, I did sleep on the floor of my pastor's hotel room. But on a formal level, the General Synod is the body that decides on faith pronouncements, resolutions of witness, and most important and other important matters for the national setting of the church. This synod considered matters as diverse as mindful and faithful eating, support for the release of Puerto Rican political prisoners, support for the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered parents to adopt and raise children, support for international rights related to sexual orientation and gender identity, and healthcare coverage for clergy families. Synod also approved a common agreement on the mutual recognition of baptism between the Reformed churches, that's us, the Presbyterians, the Reformed Church of America, and the Roman Catholic Church in the United States. And in dealing with the most contentious issue of the last two synods, it approved a set of sweeping changes to the United Church of Christ Constitution and bylaws, which will dramatically reduce the number of individuals who serve on the national governing boards of the church. Those changes will also eliminate my new position in 2 years if the amendments are approved by 2/3 of the conference. So not only did I take a pay cut, but it may only be for 2 years. Sometime about like that. And of course, Synod elects the 5 officers that compose, as Steve said, the collegium of officers, who collectively lead the national setting. This year, 3 of those positions were up for election. At its best, Synod provides a time for UCC folks from all around the country to get together, debate issues, or as my predecessor, Edith Guffey, likes to say, have family chats, to sing and dance, to experience soaring worship and beautiful music, to learn about new national initiatives, to break bread with folks from around the country, to hear from our leaders, and to make important decisions of our covenantal life together as a national church. You can think of it as a big congregational meeting that goes on 12 hours a day for 5 days. Imagine that. So Stacy and I flew off on Thursday morning, and Synod officially began Friday afternoon. Soon thereafter, my colleague, the Reverend Ben Guess, who by the way is now the first openly lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender clergy person to be a national officer in a major Protestant denomination, delivered his candidate speech for the position of Executive Minister of Local Church Ministries. Ben is an amazing preacher and a wonderfully creative guy, and his speech soared for nearly 25 minutes. My nervousness jumped up considerably. Later that evening, my colleague, the Reverend Jim Mose, gave his speech for election to the position of Executive Minister for wider church ministries. Jim is also a fine preacher, and his was a great sermon. So my anxiety was up another notch or 2. I wasn't scheduled to deliver my speech until first thing Monday morning. All weekend, I spent time in anxious prayer and reflection about what I planned to say. Unlike Ben and Jim, I plan to tell the delegates and visitors about me, to share some of my faith story so they would know who I am. I plan to tell them the story about how important this church was in my development and my sense that now is the time for me to pay back all the wonderful folks who invested in me over the years. I plan to tell them the story of the closing of First Church in Tucson and our hope for a new church, started with the proceeds of the sale of our property. And I plan to tell them the story of going to Synod in Atlanta as a visitor, about how as I sat in the audience during the debate on the marriage equality resolution, I found myself in front of a conference youth delegation, and how as the vote was called, those wonderful young people reached out and grabbed each other's hands. And I could hear them praying, and about how after the vote we all cried, which was one of the most moving moments of my life. I wanted to let them know that it's for those young people, and for the countless others in our churches, young and old, and for those new folks yet to come, that I want to do this work. At the end of all the discernment and worry, I decided that it was best to do what I'd originally planned, and so I took the stage at 8:40 Monday morning, first thing, and talked from my heart for about 12 minutes. You should be so lucky this morning. The positive response I received is still overwhelming. So you know, Jesus was all about telling stories too. In this morning's reading, we've heard Jesus beginning this third set of teachings in the Gospel of Matthew. Now let's recall for a moment where his story was set in